Terence McAllister ambled through the grand entrance of Crestwood Academy on a misty autumn day, clutching his threadbare satchel close to his side. At 16 years of age, standing just under 5'7" with a slender physique, he looked younger than he was. His sandy brown hair flopped onto his brow in a disheveled manner, and his clothing, thrift store khakis and an old navy jacket, practically advertised him as someone to be trifled with. Moving from rural Maine to this lavish boarding school had been his father's notion of a new beginning after his mother's passing, but Terence understood better. Trouble had a habit of seeking him out, no matter where he went. The hallways of Crestwood bustled with the excitement of students returning from weekend excursions. Designer luggage, fancy shoes, and the latest gadgets offered a sharp contrast to Terence's simple appearance. He kept his gaze lowered, navigating through crowds of teenagers who hardly noticed he existed. This was just how he liked it: unseen, unnoticed, secure. Mr. Abernathy, his first-period history teacher, introduced him to the class with strained enthusiasm. "Everyone, we have a new student joining us today. Terence McAllister, would you like to tell us a little about yourself?" "I'm from Maine," Terence spoke softly, his voice barely audible at the back of the room. "That's pretty much it." A few giggles spread through the class. He saw three lads at the rear exchanging glances and grins. The biggest of the three, a husky fellow with slicked-back hair and steely grey eyes, leaned back in his chair with an expression that Terence knew all too well: a predator sizing up its quarry. During the noon meal, Terence found a vacant spot in the corner of the dining hall, hoping to eat his bread roll in peace while observing the social circles surrounding him. The popular set dominated the central tables, their loud voices bouncing off the high ceilings. Athletes grouped near the windows, still wearing their varsity sweaters like armor, and scattered throughout were the various cliques and groups that made high school feel like a meticulously rehearsed performance. "Well, well, what have we here?" The voice came from behind him, dripping with false curiosity. Terence turned to see the three lads from his history class approaching his table. The ringleader, the one with the slicked-back hair, wore a Crestwood rowing jacket with Everett stitched across the back. His two sidekicks stood beside him like faithful henchmen. One was gangly and awkward with a smattering of freckles, while the other was stout with arms that hinted at time spent lifting weights. "You're the new boy, right?" "Terence?" Everett questioned, plopping into the seat across from him uninvited. "I'm Samuel Everett. This is Clarence," he gestured to the gangly one, "and Bartholomew," pointing to the stout companion. "We're in charge around here, just so you know." Terence kept eating his bread roll, hoping they'd lose interest and go away. Experience had taught him that engaging with bullies only made things worse. Better to weather the storm and hope it passed quickly. "Not much of a talker, are you?" Samuel continued, reaching across the table to snatch Terence's orange. He took a huge bite, juice dripping down his chin. "That's probably wise. Quiet types tend to stay out of trouble." Clarence snickered. "Look at him, Samuel. I bet he's never even been in a scuffle. Probably cries when he gets a paper cut." "Leave me be," Terence said quietly, his eyes never leaving his food. "Or what?" Bartholomew chimed in, his voice artificially high-pitched in mockery. "You gonna run home to Mummy? Oh wait, I heard you don't have a mummy anymore. That's tough, mate. No wonder you're such a scaredy cat." The comment landed like a physical blow, but Terence forced himself to stay composed. His hands tightened into fists under the table, muscle memory from hours of training threatening to take over his carefully maintained control. But he couldn't reveal that side of himself. Not here, not ever. "I think our new friend needs to understand how things work at Crestwood," Samuel said, standing up and motioning for his chums to follow. "See you around, Terence. Real soon." As they walked away, Terence allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, releasing the tension that had built up in his shoulders. Around him, other students resumed their conversations, having watched the encounter with the detached interest of onlookers at a circus. No one intervened. No one ever did. The pattern became clear quickly over the following weeks. Samuel and his cronies, who Terence discovered were big shots on the rowing team and untouchable in the school's social order, made his life a misery with careful precision. They would accidentally knock into him in the hallways, sending his books tumbling to the floor. They'd swipe his meal tickets, claiming it was a new student fee. In sports, they'd target him during cricket practice with throws that bordered on assault. The worst incidents happened in the spaces between classes, when teachers weren't around and supervisors were nowhere to be found. Samuel seemed to have a knack for finding Terence alone, whether in empty corridors or hidden corners. Each encounter followed a similar pattern, verbal insults leading to physical intimidation, all while Terence maintained his passive demeanor. "Why don't you fight back?" Samuel asked one afternoon after cornering Terence near the chemistry lab. "Are you really that pathetic, or are you just frightened?" Terence said nothing, his dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Samuel's shoulder. Inside, however, a different conversation was taking place. Every muscle in his body catalogued Samuel's posture, his weight distribution, the way he favored his left side. Terence could see at least 4 different ways to end this confrontation in under 10 seconds, but he forced himself to remain still. He had made a promise to his father after they moved from Maine. No more fighting, no more violence. He had seen what that world could do, had lost his wife because of it, and Terence refused to break his heart by returning to those ways, even if it meant enduring humiliation daily. "I think he's broken," Clarence observed, shoving Terence's shoulder hard enough to send him stumbling backward, like a wind-up toy that stopped working. "Maybe we need to wind him up," Bartholomew suggested, cracking his knuckles in a theatrical way. But Samuel held up a hand, stopping his friends from escalating further. There was something calculating in his expression, as if he was studying Terence for signs of weakness or hidden strength. "Nah, not here. Too many eyes. But soon, new boy, real soon." The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late November. Terence had been at Crestwood for nearly 2 months, and the daily torment had become as predictable as his morning routine. He had developed strategies for avoiding the worst of it, alternate routes through the building, timing his movements to avoid Samuel's gang, eating lunch in the library instead of the dining hall. But on this particular day, his carefully constructed defenses failed him. Terence was leaving his last class when he realized he'd forgotten his physics book. The hallways had mostly emptied, with most students eager to start their weekends. He quickly retrieved the book from his locker and headed toward the main exit, only to find his path blocked by Samuel, Clarence, and Bartholomew near the gymnasium doors. "Going somewhere, new boy?" Samuel asked, his voice carrying an edge that Terence hadn't heard before. "Just heading home," Terence replied, shifting the textbook to his other arm and looking for another way to leave. "Actually, I think you're coming with us," Samuel said, stepping closer. "We've been talking and we realized we never properly welcomed you to Crestwood. That's not very polite of us." Before Terence could respond, Clarence grabbed his arm while Bartholomew moved to block any possible escape. They guided him through the gym doors and down a corridor that led to the boxing ring. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, and Terence felt his heart race despite his efforts to stay calm. The boxing ring was empty, its windows facing the back parking lot where no one would see what happened inside. Samuel flicked on the lights, and the fluorescent bulbs cast harsh shadows across the equipment. "Here's the thing, Terence," Samuel said, removing his rowing jacket and hanging it carefully on a hook. "I've been watching you these past couple months, and something doesn't add up. You take everything we dish out without fighting back, but there's something in your eyes, something that says you could fight back if you wanted to." Terence set his textbook on a nearby bench, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I don't want any trouble." "Too bad," Clarence interjected, because trouble found you. See, I think you're hiding something, Samuel continued, rolling up his sleeves. Maybe you're tougher than you look. Maybe you're just playing victim to get sympathy. Either way, I'm tired of wondering. Bartholomew cracked his knuckles again, the sound unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. Can we just get this over with? I've got a date tonight. You know what I think? Samuel asked, stepping into Terence's personal space. I think you're a fake. I think you're putting on this whole quiet act because you're scared of what people might think if they knew the real you. But I'm going to find out who you really are. Without warning, Samuel's right hand shot forward in a straight punch aimed directly at Terence's face. It was an obvious attack, thrown with the confidence of someone who had never faced real resistance. Samuel expected to connect with Terence's nose, to see blood and tears, and finally break through the new boy's mysterious composure. Instead, Terence swayed his head 6 inches to the left. Samuel's fist whizzed past Terence's ear, the momentum carrying him forward and off balance. For a moment, confusion flickered across the bully's face as his brain tried to process what had just happened. In that same instant, Terence's body moved with fluid precision that spoke of countless hours of training. His left hand shot up to grab Samuel's extended wrist, while his right palm struck upward into Samuel's elbow joint. The combination created a leverage point that sent Samuel spinning sideways before crashing into a stack of jump ropes. The wooden handles clattered together like discordant bells as Samuel hit the floor hard. Clarence reacted first, charging forward with his longer reach and throwing a clumsy punch. Terence ducked under the blow and swept Clarence's lead leg, sending the gangly boy tumbling to the ground. Before Clarence could recover, Terence grabbed him by the collar and helped him to his feet, only to immediately throw him back down with a perfectly executed shoulder throw that sent Clarence sliding across the padded floor. Bartholomew, despite his stout build and weightlifting experience, hesitated for a crucial second as he watched his 2 friends get taken apart with surgical precision. That hesitation cost him dearly. Terence closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, feinted left to draw Bartholomew's guard in that direction, then drove his right fist into Bartholomew's stomach with enough force to double him over, gasping for air. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. Samuel struggled to his feet, his rowing jacket now wrinkled and his slicked back hair disheveled. Blood trickled from a small cut on his forehead where he'd struck the jump ropes. What the hell? How did you wanted to know who I really am? Terence asked, his voice calm but carrying a new authority that filled the room. I'm someone who's been fighting since I was 7 years old. I'm someone who spent every afternoon for 10 years learning how to protect myself with my bare hands. I'm someone who chose not to use those skills because I promised my father I wouldn't become the kind of person who solves problems with violence. Clarence rolled over onto his hands and knees, still trying to figure out how he'd ended up on the floor so quickly. Bartholomew remained doubled over, taking shallow breaths and looking like he might be sick. But here's what you need to understand, Terence continued, his dark eyes moving from one defeated bully to the next. Just because I don't want to fight doesn't mean I can't fight. Just because I prefer peace doesn't mean I'll let you walk all over me forever. You pushed and pushed until you broke something inside me, and now you get to see what I've been holding back. Samuel wiped blood from his forehead with the back of his hand, his expression cycling through anger, confusion, and something that might have been fear. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Terence replied firmly, because if you come at me again, I won't hold back next time. What just happened? That was me being gentle. That was me using just enough force to make a point without seriously hurting any of you. But if you push me again, if you make me choose between your well-being and mine, I'll choose mine every single time. He picked up his physics textbook and walked toward the door, pausing only when Samuel called out behind him, "Wait, how do we know you won't tell anyone about this?" Terence turned back, studying the 3 boys who had made his life miserable for months. They looked smaller now, somehow deflated and ordinary. Because this was never about embarrassing you or getting revenge. This was about making it stop. If it stops, then we're done. If it doesn't, he shrugged. Well, you've seen what happens when you underestimate people. Word of the boxing ring incident spread through Crestwood Academy with the speed that only high school gossip could achieve. By Monday morning, everyone seemed to know that something had happened between Terence McAllister and Samuel Everett's gang, though the details varied wildly depending on who was telling the story. Some versions had Terence as a secret martial arts master who had destroyed 3 rowing stars without breaking a sweat. Others claimed he was connected to dangerous people back in Maine and had made threats that scared Samuel into backing down. A few creative souls even suggested he was in a special program and had secret training. Terence ignored the whispers and stares, maintaining his preference for quiet anonymity. But something fundamental had shifted in the school's social dynamics. Students who had previously looked through him now offered cautious nods of acknowledgement in the hallways. Teachers seemed more inclined to include him in class discussions. Even the kitchen staff gave him extra bread without being asked. Samuel, Clarence, and Bartholomew kept their distance, though Terence occasionally caught them watching him from across rooms with expressions he couldn't quite read. There were no more accidental encounters, no more meal ticket taxation, no more targeted harassment. The 3 boys seemed to have developed a sudden interest in avoiding Terence entirely. The transformation wasn't lost on other students who had been suffering under similar treatment. A younger student named Gregory, who had been Samuel's previous favorite target, approached Terence one afternoon with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. "I don't know what you did," Gregory said quietly, "but thank you. Samuel hasn't bothered me once since last week." Terence nodded but didn't elaborate. He had no interest in becoming the school's designated hero or protector. He simply wanted to finish his senior year in peace and move on to whatever came next. The real test came 3 weeks later during lunchtime. Terence was sitting at his usual corner table, finally able to eat without constantly watching his back, when he noticed a commotion near the center of the dining hall. A group of older students had surrounded a younger girl, teasing her about her old-fashioned clothes and worn shoes while she tried unsuccessfully to gather her scattered books. For a moment, Terence felt the familiar urge to intervene, to use his skills to help someone who couldn't help themselves. But then he caught sight of Samuel Everett at a nearby table, watching the scene unfold with detached interest. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Terence saw something like understanding pass between them. Samuel stood up, walked over to the group of bullies, and said something that Terence couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it caused the older students to disperse immediately, leaving the younger girl to collect her belongings in peace. Samuel didn't make a big show of it or seek recognition for his intervention. He simply returned to his table and continued eating his lunch. It wasn't redemption exactly. Samuel Everett was still the same person who had made Terence's life miserable for months. But it was acknowledgement, recognition that power came with responsibility, and that strength should protect rather than prey upon weakness. As Terence finished his senior year at Crestwood Academy, he reflected on the lessons he had learned about violence, choice, and the courage required to break cycles of harm. He had discovered that true strength wasn't measured by how much damage you could inflict, but by how much restraint you could show when provoked. He had learned that sometimes you had to stand up for yourself to earn respect, but that standing up didn't require becoming what you despised. Most importantly, he had proven to himself that he could honor his promise to his father while still protecting his own dignity. The skills he had learned before the loss of his mother didn't have to define Terence's future. They could simply be tools in his arsenal, used only when absolutely necessary and always with the goal of de-escalation rather than domination. On graduation day, as Terence walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he caught sight of Samuel Everett in the audience. The former bully offered a small nod of acknowledgement, not friendship exactly, but mutual respect between two people who had learned something valuable about themselves and each other. Terence nodded back, then looked toward the future with the confidence that came from knowing who he really was and what he was capable of when pushed too far. He had found his balance between peace and strength, between victim and aggressor, and that balance would serve him well in whatever challenges lay ahead.